with us.
Yes, thank you for joining.
Thanks for having this. This is great. I'm excited.
Absolutely. And are you in Boulder still?
Yes.
Currently?
Yep. Yeah. So I'm in my last semester of grad school at CU. So I graduate in May, and then I'll probably be in the Denver area after this.
Cool. And you're a candidate for an MFA, right? Currently?
Yep. Yeah. Yeah.
What's is your concentration sculpture? I was just looking at your website and stuff. Or what is your
that's a good question. I know my website says sculpture. That was my undergrad degree, drawing and sculpture, and now I'm in the painting and drawing department. But it's interdisciplinary.
Yeah,
so.
Absolutely. Cool. Well, yeah, if you want to just jump into telling us a little bit about your background, growing up, and kind of how that, I know you have a really interesting story about like kind of being in the Midwest and being queer and all of that. So how that kind of informed your personal journey, but also your creative artistic journey as well.
Yeah. Okay. Let's jump in. So I'm from Wisconsin. I'm from Medford, Wisconsin originally. But my parents divorced when I was 6, so I've kind of moved all over Wisconsin. Art wasn't like a big thing in my family, but my mom did bring us, like, whenever we'd go down to like Madison to visit family members and stuff, we'd always go to like art museums and stuff. But yeah, like the general understanding of like art in the Midwest is very much like wildlife art, like rural core art, like Thomas Kincaid and Terry Redlin, and yeah, like, wildlife art. Like that's like the idea of what art is, which is totally valid. It's just like not what most people think of fine art. And that, I think, it's because elitism in the art world, like it is sort of a way of keeping quote unquote uneducated people outside of the art world. So there's like 2 separate art worlds happening in the Midwest. There's like the actual like capital A fine art world, which is elitist and exclusionary. And then there's like wildlife art and like the Birds and Art show that happens every year in Wisconsin, and things like that. So that was like the kind of art that I grew up with and like looked up to, I guess. But I never saw my identity represented, being like queer and non-binary, and I never saw like really anything outside of heteronormativity represented. And I think that's a problem because I did grow up really closely in nature, closely to nature. So I know that nature isn't always heteronormative in the way that we understand it. Like there is queerness that happens in nature, and also queerness in our interpersonal lives. There's like queerness everywhere, and it's just not talked about. It's very like taboo still. So I'm very much trying to like take the visual language that people respond to in the Midwest and rural America and represent queer narratives and storylines through that visual language. So that's kind of like the impetus of all my work. As far as like growing up, so I went to Menominee, or I lived in Menominee, Wisconsin for middle school and high school, and also for my undergrad degree. So I was kind of in this space that was like near the cities, but also like very much a rural space, like near the Twin Cities of Minnesota. So I think that was kind of like the place that I started realizing like the difference that was happening and like the queer exodus from rural America. So there were all these like liberal and queer people moving away from these rural towns that still were very like cultural centers, in my opinion. Like Menominee, Wisconsin has this beautiful stage theater. It's called the Mabel Tainter, and I'm just gonna drink some water.
Hydrate.
It's called the Jewelry Box of the Midwest, this theater, and it's because Menominee, Wisconsin used to be this like lumber baron town. So it has this really crazy history, like where they basically like cut all the red cedar down in Wisconsin and like sent them down this river, and the city is built around this dam, and it's actually where like the Tainter Gate was invented, which is like a type of dam that like raises and lowers, and it's not that important. But basically like there's all this history, like very rich history that was hand in hand with like theater and arts and things like that. And all that stuff is still there, but like people are just leaving it behind. So I have a lot of appreciation for where I came from, like northern Wisconsin and the communities that raised me. And I think that the work ethic that's instilled in people there is so beautiful. Like it's a really incredible thing to like be a hard worker, and like when it's cold for 9 months out of the year, just like really focus on what you're doing and like perfect what you're doing. But at the same time, there's a lot of exclusion happening and like not a lot of talk of difference. So that's why people feel excluded. So yeah.
Have you had a chance much to, so I like what you were saying about just kind of your entire theme being around using that visual language of what you grew up with and that kind of wildlife art, but, you know, commenting on queer narratives and just alternative, you know, not what that is exactly. And you've obviously come out to Boulder, to Colorado, and done school and stuff here, but have you ever really had a chance to take that art back and like show it back home and make statements in that way, kind of?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I'm actually a part of this new organization called the Rural Midwest Artists Cooperative.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm on the board of that, and it just started this last year. And our goal is to like start bringing arts back to the rural Midwest space. So we're working on programming with that and like showing art at schools of these people that like still very much like feel an attachment to where they're from, but like a lot of people in the arts, I feel like, have to leave for jobs and things, and like there really isn't like arts money in the rural scape. So we're trying to change that. So it's in the very early works, but we're trying to do that. And then also one of my biggest goals in life is to be accepted into it feels like a very small goal to like anyone else, but is to be accepted into the Birds and Art show in Wausau, Wisconsin, which actually is surprisingly really hard to get into. And Andy Warhol was in it. I think it was in '87, with a print of a bald eagle. And the reason I want to be in it so bad is because I grew up going every year with my grandparents, and my grandma's still alive. She's about 93 now, I think. And I just really want to get in before, this sounds so dramatic, before she dies, but like,
no, that's not
I just
dramatic.
like
I think that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's an amazing goal.
So is that
Yeah.
show all different kinds of meat? Tell us a little bit about that. Is that like a lot of different mediums? And obviously the theme is birds, like for the most part?
That's literally it. Yep. Yeah. So it's just birds and art. I think maybe they have like themes each year, like about the type of birds, but I'm not really sure about that. But yeah, the application for this next year is due in April. So I'm trying to get like 2 paintings done, and you can only submit 2 at a time. So it's like a little bit difficult and like strategic.
Have you applied before, or is this going to be the first year you're like going for it?
This will be my 3rd year, but I didn't really take the application seriously the first 2 years. So hopefully this year. Yeah.
I love, so even just looking at the work that you do have on your website, however recent that is or not, and also we'll touch on the mural you did for us for Streetwise, obviously. You obviously love birds, like as a theme. What does that symbolize for you, or what does that mean? I really love that poem by, I've never heard of Kevin Cantor, but I went and I followed him on your website. It's a beautiful poem about the considering love, the queer language of common birds. I was like, that's incredible.
Yeah. So the poem actually, Kevin is a non-binary poet that is actually from the Midwest as well. And they live in Boulder now too. They actually just put out a book that I illustrated the cover for.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they're incredible. But that poem was made from words from my artist statement. So like
really?
they took my artist statement and then like sort of rearranged it into a
wow,
poem.
that's so cool. I love that cross-pollination. That's great.
That's
yeah. That was like just the first thing obviously on your homepage, and I was like, oh man, it's a good one.
Yeah, but birds. So my grandparents on my mother's side were, or my grandma still is, I believe, like part of the Audubon Society. So like they do like the bird watching, and like they used to do a lot of like traveling with their RV and going to different wildlife refuges and things like that. So birding was always sort of this like connection to nature, like naming things that we see around us and like building a relationship. But it also represented like, in a weird way, like truth and knowledge, I guess, because when you can name something, you can build a relationship with it, but you can also like understand it in a way. And I know that's a double-edged sword because we do understand things in like a very like from a human perspective, obviously, and things are existing beyond that. So it can be problematic when like our knowledge ends, like when our knowledge about the world around us ends, because we don't know everything and we act like we do.
Don't know.
Yeah, yeah,
So little.
very much that. But yeah, so like birding always has represented this like attachment to nature, like this relationship with nature where like we are learning and observing. But also in my undergrad program, I started using birds as a like subtle symbolism for homosexuality because of the gender distinction. So if you understand the birds, like if you understand that northern cardinals are red if they're male and like buff if they're female, and then you see two red cardinals together, you can understand that there's this undertone of homosexuality. So it really like, it came from like a lexicon that had been ingrained in me, but then I was sort of subverting into a queer, library.
I love that. That's
Thank
great.
you.
I also, yeah, I mean, you're also just going to compliment you some more. You're a really good writer. So like when I was just reading you, all like the things you were writing about your work and stuff on your website, and I want to like quote you basically. I'm sorry if this is awkward, but I just wanted to, I wrote it down because I was like, I love this. But when you're saying queerness is not absent from the American hinterland, in fact, I see it everywhere. The trouble comes from the lack of acknowledgement and the bleeding of human heteronormative perceptions over the natural fluid environment. Yeah, I love that and that sentiment so much. And as you've mentioned already, touched on a few times, just that there is that fluidity in nature. And that's, you know, like we have these boxes and these categories and these things as humans, and then we try and like push it onto everything else. And that's just silly. Like, yeah, but I love that. I like literally wrote it down. I was like, man, that sounds great.
Yeah, I mean, and I love using the word queer because I feel like there's like such like a fluidity about the term, and like there's an openness about it. Like I'm not super big into labels that are like hyper defining and like very small or narrow. So I tend to use like queer to describe a lot of things. But the thing about like queerness is like, well, obviously like all of our knowledge is based off of like previous knowledge. So like we're building on understandings that we already have. And my first understanding of queerness was in nature. So like me observing nature and like seeing things that didn't really like fit the mold, quote unquote, because we have this very machismo understanding of, or like there's like a machismo ownership of nature for some reason. Like for some reason, like machoism just like owns nature for a gross whatever that is. We could unpack it, but it seems really ingrained.
Unpacking.
Yeah. But like basically like I would like be a child like existing in the woods in northern Wisconsin and like noticing weird things happening with like plants and animals and being like, that's different, or like that doesn't fit my understanding. And like that's my first understanding of queerness. So like everything that I've built my queer identity off of is like that understanding that like weirdness does happen naturally, and it's not like it's weird, but it's natural. So yeah,
It's only weird in that sense of the word in like that comparative way, and that, you know, you're comparing to something. Otherwise it is very natural and fluid, and it just is what it is. Like
totally,
no need to put things in boxes. So it's just humans, man, we're interesting. We should, Inez, do you want to pull up the image of the mural that they did for us? So that was 2020, right? That was last year.
Yep. Yeah, in September.
Cool. I've actually walked by it so many times, so I'm really glad to have been able to like put a relation to like who it actually was.
Nice.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. What a good photo.
I know, it's a great photo. So I love that. I think you quoted it as saying it's a flamboyant celebration of Colorado's incredible mountain birds. Do you want to just talk about what inspired this? I mean, obviously we've already talked about birds a little bit and what that means to you, but maybe in more specific ways like corvids and just the mural in a general sense.
Yeah, so the initial plan for the mural was to have like just all kinds of birds from the mountain range. So like I was really getting into hiking the summer that I moved here, and noticing like all these different colored birds, and like we have colored birds back in Wisconsin, but they're not like as colorful. And I felt like it was so flamboyant and like celebratory, and I just love like color and nature. I mean, everyone does, but I decided to focus in on corvids after I submitted the proposal, because they're kind of like assholes. Like they're like kind of jerks of birds. But they're really funny in that way. Yeah, like they're really silly. And so I was like doing some research into them, because we have blue jays back in Wisconsin, but not this like wide array of corvids like there are here. Yeah, we have
a corvid, just like my bird knowledge.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's actually the one that's on the far right side of the photo.
Okay. Yeah.
And then, so we have blue jays and we have American crows. So we don't have like ravens or magpies or anything like that. So I was just excited about like how many corvid species there were. And while I was reading about them, I have this like book of like homosexuality in animals by Bruce Bagamill, which is like on the right side, the excerpt that I included. And there's kind of like an excessive chapter about corvids, and specifically like magpies, where they actually are regularly like engaging in homosexual acts and things like that. So it was exciting to me that there's this bird that like people kind of take for granted here. Like a lot of people don't like magpies for whatever reason. But it's this bird that's like really silly, like very beautiful, I would say too. Like it has iridescent feathers. So there's like that queer aspect. But also like literally engaging in like queer acts and things like that. So I just want to like expand our understanding of the birds that are around us, and like, and the queerness that exists in nature around us.
Oh yeah, I love that. I love that too, because I know that it's something that we see in like a lot of mammals and a lot of like, warm-blooded creatures. I mean, I guess birds are probably warm. Are birds warm-blooded? Now I'm feeling stupid.
No, you're fine. They're technically reptiles. Yeah.
Yeah, because they're like the closest to like relation to dinosaurs or something. Right? But that's cool. Yeah, that's cool to also see that those patterns obviously exist naturally in other species that aren't necessarily mammalian. Yeah, that's really awesome. And it's a beautiful mural. How long did that take?
It was 1 week, but we had to take 2 days off because that was like during that crazy snow that came in the middle of September.
Yeah.
And like all those trees fell down. So I had to take 2 days off. So I think it was 5 days total.
And I saw the image just there of you were painting with a brush. Is this all like painted by hand in that way, or is there also spray paint or?
So I did spray paint initially, which was actually my first time using spray paint. And it was really fun. I really enjoyed it. And then I went back over with like black house paint and like did all the lining and the detailing and stuff with that.
Very cool. Had you done murals before, or was this your first?
This was my first public mural. So I've done one mural before, and it was at a gay bar in Milwaukee, and it was just like mermaids on a fence. So the substrate wasn't exactly ideal. It was like very difficult to paint on, but and that was just blue, black, and white were my 3 colors of paint. So this was like my first like actual mural.
I love that. A couple of the other artists we've interviewed too are like, yeah, this wasn't like my first time either like working with spray paint or my first time working on a large scale. And I just think that is so dope and so inspiring, because it's like in the public realm, right? And it's like probably intimidating in certain ways to be like, this is, one of my first times trying to implement whatever it is.
Yeah.
So it's so great then when it also turns out so beautiful and you're like, I did that. You can step back and you realize that so many people are going to see that, as opposed to anything in a gallery maybe, or, because the barriers are just so much lower with the muralism and the public stuff.
Totally. And that's like very much what I love about it, because like I was talking before about like the exclusion in the art world, that's something I think about all the time, is like how is our art even impacting people if we're like putting it in these spaces that like even just like the buildings themselves are exclusionary to people? Because when some people see like buildings with white columns and things like that, they're like, that's not a space for me. That's not like a place that's inviting for me. So even just like architecture can be exclusionary. And that's where we like think of art as like being in its ideal or optimal situation, but I don't know, like, I don't think that's what my art feels like. Like a lot of my like quote unquote fine art is very much intended for like a domestic space, I would say, or like to imply a domestic space. So I really enjoyed the opportunity to like literally put this art where people walk every day, like on their way to work or like during their lunch breaks. Yeah, it felt really special in that way.
Yeah, I feel like I've always been such an appreciator of muralism, of public art, of all these things, but it hasn't been really since like the last few years, and taking it more seriously and being like, no, this is like actually, yeah, lowering the barrier. It's like bringing art into people's lives who maybe just would not go and seek that out. As you were saying, even architecture, even a gallery, a museum, that can be totally like intimidating to somebody who just isn't, versed or whatever in art. But that doesn't mean that they shouldn't experience it or shouldn't be able to, I don't know, interpret it or just whatever. So it's a pleasant surprise in public when you walk up on something and it's just there and you can think about it however you want.
Curious, the other day I was in the Modern Museum in Denver, and I had this experience, and I think this shocked me. I hadn't been in a museum for a while because of the whole COVID situation. I just hadn't like necessarily seek them out. And I was like, okay, I went to the museum, and I guess it just caught me off guard, like the whole implication that when you're in a museum, like no one talks loud. It has like this library feeling. And I was like, why? Yeah. And there's like a certain thing where like, if I'm alone, I mean, I love observing art and being quiet, but at the same time, I'm like, who installed this like understanding that because you're looking at art, you can't speak out loud either?
Yeah, and as someone who is loud, like that's an issue.
Like, sometimes I just want to yell. I'm very loud talker, so I really struggle keeping my voice inside. So I always feel so awkward. I'm like,
it happened to me at the Mexican Modernism at the DAM when I went, and I just love Frida, so I'm like kind of freaking out, and I'm like yelling, kind of like, and it's echoing. And my friend was just the same thing happened. She was like, "Look, like I know you're excited, but you just need to like." You're at a 10, you need to take it down to like a 4. And I was like, okay, how do I do that? Like, and it was also the same when I was in Mexico City and I like went to her house and I was yelling there as well. And her urn was there and I was like, what is this? Like, oh man, yeah. But yeah, in an outdoor setting, that's so beautiful that you can just, you can experience it however you please, because that's a public space and there's no rules. I mean, there's rules, but not in that way, not in that.
Totally.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you think that painting a mural like for the first time and having like quote unquote, I guess, fine artist training, because I mean you did your BFA, you're almost ending your MFA, so you're taught all of this like gallery setting art, going through all of this critiques, presenting your artwork in white walls, and then all of a sudden you did this mural. Did it inform your work after that? Like, did it shift your work towards a different perspective? Did you start displaying it differently, or how did it affect your fine art work that you're working on outside of that mural aspect?
That's a good question. I think, I mean, it did. So like before I did the mural, a lot of my work was very small, like under a foot by foot sizing, because I'm like such a detail oriented person and I like really get into what I'm doing. But now I'm making all these paintings that are like, there's one that's like 6 foot tall and stuff like, and it's definitely not comparable to the mural by any means, but it sort of gave me this like confidence that I can work larger. But also on the flip side of that, like I had the privilege of doing this field guide project for the University of Colorado Boulder with this very incredible person, Joanne Morris Tate, who I think she's also graduating this semester. But she basically did all this research, which like was about engaging the community and specifically CU Boulder students who were coming to the area from other regions, and building relationships with species that were on campus, because right now there is a lot of mistreatment towards nature and the species in our area. And she wanted to change that and like build a relationship so that people actually do care with nature. So it was sort of like a nice transition from that project into the mural because that ended like right before the mural started. We were putting together videos for like our campus field guide and stuff. So it was kind of like both a nice cap for that, but also like a welcoming in of like formal decisions that were happening in the studio.
Awesome.
Very cool.
Mm-hmm.
Can we pull up their Instagram link really quick? I just want to comment on, I feel like you do a lot of really cool like self-portraiture, correct me if I'm wrong, but just in lots of varying ways and styles. And the most recent one that was posted on your Instagram, like with the sunset behind and the bird silhouettes, and oh my God, I was like, that's incredible. And it's well timed too, like relevant timing, because I've been facilitating these with Streetwise, these like youth virtual after school art workshops. And one of the ideas that we're doing is like self-portraiture as a form of activism, as a claiming of self or a reclaiming of self, or however you want to view that. So just seeing that you actually really do focus on that self-portraiture to an extent was like really relevant timing. And I'd love to hear just a little more about that journey and about, what kind of sparked that desire to, document yourself in that way creatively and in so many ways.
Totally. So this is actually part of my thesis work that I'll be showing in May on campus. This is one of those like 6 foot tall paintings that I'm working on. So the figure is actually, it's like life size essentially, maybe a little bit smaller than life size, but it is very much about like existing in this rural, like specifically Wisconsin scape, and coming into my non-binariness through clothing, essentially. So the underwear that I'm wearing, which is sort of what the painting is about, is it's underwear and also like high-waisted jeans that I inherited from my uncle who died of HIV the year that I was born. And so it's kind of a long story, but basically my uncle died of HIV the year that I was born. So I'm named after him. His name was Marty McRoberts and my name is Robert Martin Bueller. And so I use his name, my middle name, as my like last name in my artwork, sort of as an honoring of him, because even though we never got to meet in person, he being like the only other queer person in my family influenced my life in such a profound way. Mm-hmm. And basically like because his life was cut short, like he didn't get to like really live his art career. Like he did to an extent, but it was obviously like cut off. And the way that he left this world caused a lot of or instilled a lot of like different feelings and emotions in my mother's side of the family, which in turn affected the way that I was treated when I was growing up. So I feel like there was a lot of like guilt and shame around his death. And so there was a lot more acceptance of me when I was coming into my queerness. And so in like a weird twist of events, I've just been like inheriting objects and like belongings of his as I've gotten older. And yeah, it's like kind of a strange thing because I'm inheriting these artifacts that are like from queer people in the 80s and 90s or 70s, 80s and 90s, and specifically like clothing and like things that touch your body and affect your expression. And so I inherited this clothing that affected my gender expression and like allowed me to come into my non-binariness, which is very much what this painting is about. And so I'm referencing the birth of Venus because this is sort of like my birth of non-binariness. Yeah.
I love that. Wow. Thank you for sharing. I already thought it was like a super incredible, visually pleasing piece, but that's amazing. Wow. Yeah. So are you, the clothes that you're saying, or the clothes that you inherited from him, is that what you're cool?
Yeah. So like the high-waisted jeans, which are not actually around my waist in this painting, but then also the underwear, because like when you wear high-waisted jeans, you have to sort of like tuck, more or less, like you have to like hide your genitalia. And so when you're living in a small town in Wisconsin and there's not this acceptance of queerness, like I can't just go into the store and buy the clothes that I need to express myself necessarily and feel safe doing that. And so when you're literally handed a box of clothing that has everything that you need, you're just going to take advantage of it. So the underwear like was my uncle's underwear, but then I wore the underwear and like got to like wear the high-waisted jeans and things. So yeah, the underwear and the pants are my uncle's.
I love that. That's also interesting, relevant timing. I've had an ongoing conversation with a friend recently, just kind of about, we're talking about like thrifting and about like, secondhand clothing and stuff, and just commenting on the magic of knowing that something had an entire life before you, sort of. And especially, I mean, anything, it could be a household item, it could be anything, but there's really something profound about clothing and about knowing that somebody has had or has memories regarding wearing that, or I don't know, it's just, and like they probably just hold such energy. And like half the time I'm talking about it more in a, like I thrift, these weird things and like who owned this weird thing before me way, but it has to be so profound in that same way. But to know that it was like your uncle's and that he did so much in them as well, and like expressed his authentic self in them.
Totally. Yeah. I think the idea of ephemera is really profound. Like these like whispers of a previous time, and especially when we're talking about the HIV/AIDS epidemic, those are people that like we can't talk to about this situation. Like we don't know their stories and their lives necessarily. Especially my family, I know that it's a difficult thing to talk about, and I really don't know that much about his life. So when I have these objects and I like can feel the way that they're affecting my body, and like they serve purposes and satisfy expression, it's a really beautiful way to connect to this like lost generation of queer people too.
Totally. It's like a portal.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah, I love that. That's so meaningful. Wow, this has been great. This has been so inspiring. I think that all my questions have pretty much been answered, aside from, you said, so you're in your final semester of your MFA, is that what you said? So does that mean?
Yes. My exhibition, yeah. So, well, I think technically I'm a summer grad,
Okay.
but my exhibition is May 11th through the 21st, I think.
And is that, so that's kind of like your creative thesis, dissertation, kind of what you were just saying with the self-portrait, when you'll be showing like this collection on campus?
Yeah, so it'll be in the CU Art Museum. I'm not sure what the like openness about that is with COVID right now. I think it's mostly just open to CU campus, like students and staff, which is unfortunate, but there will be like virtual panel discussions and stuff around it.
Cool. I'd love to tune into that.
Yeah, I'd love to go see it. You think if I have like a student card from like a CU Buff student card, I can go in there?
I think so, yeah. I'm not entirely sure, but I think so.
I happen to have one, so I'm thrilled about it.
Good.
I love it. Do you have any like plans or ideas or hopes or aspirations in terms of once that's done and once you've, graduated and received the degree and such, like kind of, are you going to stay in the area, or what are you thinking?
Yeah, trying to figure that out right now. So I think my husband lives here in Boulder with me, which I'm very privileged to have like a person that moved here with me. But he has a job still in Boulder, so we're gonna probably move down to Denver. I might just like play the artist role for a year or so, and see how that goes, because I've been in school for my whole life, basically. Yeah. So however many years, 27. And so I think we might move down to Denver and just like see what happens for a year. But I'm thinking about maybe doing my PhD, because oh, my mouth is so dry.
Colorado.
Yeah, literally. So I might do my PhD either in American Studies or queer theories, depending. I'm thinking American Studies because, like I was saying before about like American wildlife art and rural core art being so like separate from the art world, I also think it's like not talked about for that reason, or not like written about enough for that reason. And when it is written about, it's obviously very like misogynist, and we only know like male wildlife artists really. So I would like to sort of expand that genre and like bring it back into relevancy. Yeah, we used to think about like American wildlife art as being like so informative and like educational. Like we had like John James Audubon, and like literally he's not the best person, but like that's how we understood wildlife art. And now it's so romanticized and like it's like a men's genre. And I just think that there's a lot of opportunity for expanded symbolism, but also expanded understanding of nature. So I would like to write about that. We'll see though.
That's cool. I mean, you brought up two fields. You brought up the American studies and the queer theory, and it kind of sounds like you'd be tackling the American studies in a queer theory way, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, exactly.
So kind of merging those. I think that's inspiring. So, and a PhD.
And it would be a great way to like just continue to inform your art practice and like, and I mean, the more knowledge, the better, honestly.
Totally.
So whenever it's like just informing what you're doing and like getting more into depth with it, if it inspires you, it'll be such a great way to like inform your work and keep those juices flowing.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Oh, I do have one last question. You keep saying rural core, and I'm curious, where does that come from, or what does it mean? When it was on your website, I thought maybe you had like made it up, and I was like, oh, is it like hardcore rural? Like I just didn't know. But then you've also mentioned it just a couple of times in passing, in a historical and in a present sense. So what does that mean?
That's a great question, and I have like sort of like a page about this in my thesis,
Nice.
because I kind of did make it. I didn't make it up, but I'm the only person that's getting like mileage out of this word right now, I think. So basically, if you like search rural core on Instagram, like it's just going to be my artwork and then some weird like outdoor partying. I don't really know. But basically it's like hardcore, and how hardcore sort of evolved into like different subgenres kind of through TikTok and Instagram. Like there's like cottagecore and I can't think of other ones right now, but so like rural core is basically just like rural, everything like encompassing in the rural sphere. So that's why I use it, because it's not just like wildlife art that I'm talking about. It's also like Norman Rockwell and like American Gothic and stuff like that.
Cool. So you're just like queer rural core, just smash it together. I love it.
Yes, exactly.
Perfect. Cool. Well, yeah, I think that covers everything. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been great.
Yeah, this has been really great. Thank you.
Yeah. Inez, do you have any final thoughts or questions?
No, this was a lot of fun. It was great to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, good to talk to you both too. Great questions. I love this.
Oh yeah.
Great answers.
You love it. Yeah. Good answers. All right, sweet. Bye guys.
Bye.
Bye.